We'll give an overview of the endocrine system. We'll first talk, generally speaking, of how the endocrine system works. Then we'll move into talking about specific glands, the hormones they produce, and the functions of those hormones. Then we'll talk about how the endocrine system works to regulate levels of hormones in the body by working with the nervous system. And then finally, we'll do a quick comparison of the endocrine system to the nervous system. The endocrine system is made up of different glands that secrete hormones. The hormones are then carried by the bloodstream to target cells in order to have an effect. As you can see here, the glands are producing the hormones, which are the dark green little dots. The bloodstream is going to carry them to different cells within the body. It's important to understand target cells because target cells are cells that have hormone-specific receptors. So when hormones are released into the bloodstream, they don't automatically have their effect. They first have to travel to specific cells that have specific receptors for the specific hormone for a specific effect. So this is not a generalized thing where hormones are released and then the effect just happens. Only specific cells have the right receptors for this hormone. Target cells can be close to the endocrine gland or they can be far away. And that's part of why we need the bloodstream to circulate these hormones so they can get to the glands that they need to have an effect on. Hormones are chemical messengers and they are produced by the body. So hormones have a lot of different roles, mainly in maintaining homeostasis. And so they're going to regulate metabolism. They're going to control, metabolism is the breakdown of food into energy. They're going to control rates of different chemical reactions that occur throughout the body. Hormones aid in cell membrane transport. They help regulate water and electrolyte balance. And then they play a key role in reproduction, growth, and development of organisms. Now we'll talk about the specific glands, the hormones they produce, and the functions of these hormones. Here's an overview and a diagram of the endocrine glands. You can see that they're the same in males and females with the exception of ovaries in females and testes in males. We'll begin by talking about the hypothalamus. Now, the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland are going to work very closely with one another. We'll also see them pop up again at the end of this screencast when we talk about how the endocrine system works to regulate hormone levels throughout the body. The hypothalamus is going to play a key role in maintaining homeostasis. I'm not going to go into the different names of the hormones produced by the hypothalamus, but you should know that the hypothalamus mainly produces hormones that start and stop the production of hormones in other endocrine glands. So you can already begin to see how the hypothalamus is integral in maintaining hormone levels because it's going to control other glands. The pituitary gland is known as the master gland. It has three main functions or three main categories of things that it does. The first thing it does is control hormone production of other glands. For example, it produces TSH or thyroid stimulating hormone, which, as the name says, is going to stimulate the production of hormones in the thyroid. The second thing it does is create its own hormones. So the pituitary gland produces hormones that control things like growth, milk production in females, and estrogen regulation. Lastly, the pituitary gland is going to release hormones that are produced in the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus produces hormones, those are sent to the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland releases them. We'll see that in more detail at the end of this screencast when we again talk about the regulation of hormone levels in the body. Next, we have the pineal gland. The pineal gland is going to help regulate our sleep-wake cycles through the production of the hormone melatonin. The thyroid gland produces a number of different hormones. We'll talk about two, which are T3 and T4. They do have longer chemical names, but we'll stick with the short versions, T3 and T4. They are going to control metabolism. So this is going to increase the rate of energy release and protein synthesis, increase growth rate, and stimulate nervous system activity. So hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism are common problems that people can have. When you have so too low, hypothyroidism, you'll see symptoms like fatigue, cold sensitivity, dry skin, and unexplained weight gain. When you have hyperthyroidism, you'll see symptoms that include unexpected weight loss, rapid or irregular heartbeat, sweating, and irritability. So on one end, you have fatigue. On the other end, you have overstimulation of the nervous system. On one side, you have unexpected weight gain. On the other side, unexpected weight loss. And you can see how those have to do with these hormones because of the role that T3 and T4 play in metabolism as well as in nervous system activity. The thyroid gland can be a tricky one if it's out of balance because it can very easily swing from hypo to hyper. So when people have problems with their thyroid gland, it can take a little while to figure out the right levels of medication for them. Next, we have the parathyroid. The parathyroid is going to contribute to bone health by controlling calcium and phosphorus levels. We'll leave that here for now, but when we talk about the skeletal system and the feedback loop that controls calcium levels in the body, we will again talk about the parathyroid. Next, we have the thymus, which plays a really big role in immune cell production. So the thymus is an organ that is in two systems, the lymphatic system as well as the endocrine system, and we'll talk about it a lot more when we talk about immunity. The adrenal glands produce two main hormones, among other things, epinephrine and norepinephrine. These are used for fight or flight responses. So you may have heard of adrenaline before when we're talking about the adrenal glands. And yes, adrenaline is produced by the adrenal glands. And so you are going to see that adrenaline is epinephrine, right? So it's the same thing. So epinephrine, norepinephrine, fight or flight responses. And in addition to those fight or flight responses, it is also going to have an effect on metabolism and supplemental sex hormones. So we'll talk about that a little later as well. Next, we have the pancreas. The pancreas has a digestive system function. We'll talk about that with the digestive system. But in terms of its endocrine system function, its job is to regulate blood sugar. So it can regulate blood sugar through the use of two hormones. It's going to use insulin to lower the blood sugar or glucagon to raise the blood sugar. Ovaries. The ovaries are just in females, and they are going to produce the hormones estrogen and progesterone. These are really critical in regulating the female reproductive system and the menstrual cycle. So they are in charge of breast development, regulating the menstrual cycle. And so these hormones will they'll fluctuate throughout the month of the menstrual cycle, as well as throughout a woman's life as she approaches puberty and then as she approaches menopause. And then they're also going to be integral in supporting the pregnancy. Lastly, we'll talk about the testes. The testes produce testosterone in males. Now, females do also have testosterone. That's produced in the ovaries, the adrenal glands. So that was that supplemental sex hormone part we talked about or touched upon with the adrenal glands, as well as other locations in the body. But for the males, testosterone production is within the testes. This is responsible for facial and other body hair, reproductive growth and sperm production, and then muscle growth. We'll talk about this with sport and muscle growth and how testosterone can be the subject of determining male versus female in sport. Lastly, we'll talk about control of hormone levels and how the endocrine system works to do that. So before we talk about how they're controlled, it's important to know that hormones are always being released by our body as needed. But because they're being released, they're also continually being broken down by enzymes, mostly in the liver, and then they're excreted in the urine. So even though we're always producing hormones, we're also always getting rid of them. So this means that we need to have constant hormone secretion in order to maintain levels of hormones within our body. Because if we're getting rid of them, we're going to keep needing to make more. And so you can see here the actual hormone concentration is kind of going to fluctuate. So it might be released and then some's broken down and then it's released and broken down. But it has an average concentration here. Just a quick reminder of feedback loops. You have some sort of variable. In this case, that variable is going to be a hormone. A receptor is going to detect a change in the level of the hormone. It's going to send that to the control center. We'll talk about the control centers in a minute. That's going to compare this to what the set point, what the value of that hormone or the level of that hormone should be. And then the effectors, which are going to be endocrine glands, are going to make adjustments to the level of hormones in the body. So there are 3 ways that our body controls hormone levels. The first way is that the endocrine gland itself is the control center, and it's going to respond directly to what the receptors tell it. The second is that the nervous system is going to stimulate endocrine glands. The third is that the hypothalamus and the anterior part of the pituitary gland are going to then stimulate other endocrine glands. So let's look at the first way. In this case, we have the endocrine system acting as the control center. So it's going to have a direct response by secreting or shutting off secretion of the hormones. So we'll have a changing level of a hormone in the blood plasma. The endocrine gland has receptors that will detect this change. They're then going to decide what change needs to be made. They're going to then secrete the hormone, which reaches the target cells within its own gland, and then an action is going to occur. So for example, the pancreas works this way. The pancreas secretes insulin when the blood sugar is high, glucagon when the blood sugar is low. The brain doesn't get involved with blood sugar regulation. The pancreas controls that all by itself. Next, we have nervous to endocrine. So the second way that the endocrine system can be regulated is by the nervous system getting involved. So here you'll have your endocrine gland, which releases hormones, which reach target cells, which cause some sort of action. And this is going to be regulated by the nervous system. So the nervous system will tell the endocrine gland that it needs to release the hormone, and then that's when it'll be released. Finally, we have one that's a little more complicated. So you can see here we have the hypothalamus, and then we have the anterior pituitary gland down here. What's going to happen in this case is that the hypothalamus is going to produce hormones that are going to be sent to the anterior pituitary gland. Then the pituitary gland is going to release those hormones, and they're going to go to a different endocrine gland. And then the endocrine gland is going to produce its hormone, which is then sent to the target cells to have some sort of action. So this one has an extra step, and that the hypothalamus produces something that's sent to the pituitary gland, which sends a hormone that's sent to a peripheral endocrine gland, which then goes to the target cells. The last thing we'll have is a quick comparison between the endocrine and nervous systems. They're both crucial for the integration and coordination of different things going on within our body in order to maintain homeostasis. So both systems are going to communicate via chemical signals, and these chemical signals are going to bind with specific receptors for specific responses. They're also both going to coordinate and regulate many of the processes within the body, as I just mentioned, especially those that contribute to homeostasis. So they both do those things. They're a little bit different in how they carry them out. So the nervous system uses the nervous system chemicals are called neurotransmitters. The endocrine system uses chemicals called hormones. So that's a little bit different, but they both use chemicals. The nervous system response occurs within seconds or less than seconds, right? So it's very, very quick. Even now, as I'm speaking, as you're listening, as you're reading, as you're writing, these things are happening. Seconds is way too long, but they occur very, very, very quickly to let you keep doing these things. The endocrine system, however, could occur within seconds, or it could take hours for this hormone to be released and circulated throughout our body. In the nervous system, the action or the response is very brief. And so this is going to stop whenever the impulse stops. So as soon as the electrical impulse is not stimulating the release of a neurotransmitter, we're done. The impulse just stops, the action stops, we're done. However, with the endocrine system, even after the endocrine glands stop secreting a hormone, the response or the action of that hormone can still last for a really long time. It can also be brief, or it could last for days. So those hormone levels could stay up a long time in your body until they eventually are broken down by the liver and then excreted from the body. So that is a brief overview of the endocrine system, the organs and hormones within it, how the endocrine system regulates the levels of hormones in our body with or without the nervous system, and then a quick comparison of the endocrine and nervous systems.